What if a buried secret in Nigerian DNA forced scientists to rewrite the origin story of all humankind? For decades, the story of our species was told like a simple map. One origin, one exodus, one clean path out of Africa, into the world. But that story just collapsed, and the wreckage began in Nigeria. In 2021, a team at the University of Cambridge, analysing genome sequences from the 1,000 Genomes Project, made a discovery so radical it rewired the timeline of human evolution. The tool they used? A breakthrough algorithm called COBRA-R, designed to detect ancient population splits invisible to archaeology. What it found, hidden inside the blood of modern Nigerians, was astonishing. A split between two distinct ancestral human populations, not Neanderthals, not Denisovans, but two entirely separate human branches which had diverged around 1.5 million years ago. And then, somehow, they merged again approximately 300,000 years ago, a full 250,000 years before Homo sapiens walked out of Africa, before written language, before the concept of nations. This wasn't a migration, it was a genetic reunion, a convergence that shaped the very species we are today. It left fingerprints across all of humanity. But the key evidence? It was preserved best in Nigeria, specifically among the Yoruba and Isan populations, whose genomes have become gold standards in global research since the 2003 HapMap project and the later 1,000 Genomes, Phase 3 release in 2015. Why Nigeria? Because Africa, especially West Africa, retains the highest genetic diversity on Earth, a consequence of being humanity's homeland. As populations migrated outward, they carried only fragments of the original code, but Nigeria kept the full archive, untouched by bottlenecks, preserving secrets no fossil ever could. And then, another anomaly emerged, one that didn't fit any known species, not Homo sapiens, not Neanderthal, not Denisovan. It was a ghost lineage, a lost ancestor, unseen in the fossil record, still living in the blood of modern Nigerians. And if that unknown species is inside us, what else have we forgotten? What if your DNA held fragments of a species that no one has ever seen? Not in bones, not in caves, but only in the code of your blood. And just like that, every map of human evolution cracked open. In 2020, two scientists, Dr. Sriram Sankararaman and Arun Durvasula, published a discovery so bizarre it forced geneticists to consider something no archaeologist had ever confirmed. A completely unknown hominin species, whose bones had never been found, had somehow left its genetic fingerprint in modern humans. Their research focused on full genome data from 4 West African populations, the Yoruba, Esan, Mende and Gambian. What they discovered was that though 2 to 19% of their DNA came from a ghost population, a mysterious archaic human lineage that had split from our ancestors long before Neanderthals or Denisovans, possibly over 1 million years ago. No fossils, no tools, no physical trace, just code. This wasn't a contaminated sample. It wasn't an error. These fragments were biologically real, and they were hiding inside genes that affect neural function and immune response. Genes like NF1, associated with brain development, and KCNIP4, linked to calcium signaling in the brain. These weren't just ancient echoes. These were functional blueprints still active in us today. And this shattered an old assumption that archaic admixture only happened outside of Africa. That Neanderthals and Denisovans were the only ancient humans we mixed with. But in West Africa, the DNA whispered a darker truth. There were others. We just haven't found their bones. This suggests something extraordinary. While early Homo sapiens were emerging in East Africa, Another group, deeply ancient, genetically distant, survived and thrived in West Africa. And at some point, they met and interbred, long before history, long before language. What does it mean when our family tree holds branches from ancestors that don't exist in the fossil record? And how many more might still be missing? But these ancient ghosts are only part of the story. Because modern Nigerian DNA also carries the genetic fingerprints of long-lost empires and forgotten migrations. What if a kingdom that once ruled the sands of the Sahara still lives on, not in ruins, but in your DNA? And one of those empires left no ruins that stood the test of time, but its legacy flows silently through the veins of its descendants. In the ancient Sahel, between the 8th and 14th centuries, the Kanem-Bornu Empire ruled a vast stretch of territory that now spans parts of modern-day Nigeria, Chad, Cameroon, and Niger. At its height, it controlled Saharan trade routes that linked West Africa to the Mediterranean world, not just with salt and gold, but with people, ideas, and bloodlines. In 2023, geneticists compared samples from modern Kanuri and Kotoko people with ancient genome data from both West and East Africa, and even the Levant. What they found stunned historians. These populations carry genetic admixture not only from neighbouring African groups, but also from North African Berber and Eurasian sources, confirming that the Sahara wasn't a wall. It was a corridor of contact, and then came the twist. Buried deep in Y chromosome analysis, researchers found a rare haplogroup, R1b1a2-V88, most common among Chadic-speaking groups like the Hausa and Fulani. According to a 2010 study by Cruciani et al., this haplogroup entered Africa around 9,000 to 5,500 years ago, brought by Proto-Afro-Asiatic pastoralists migrating south from the Near East, crossing what was then a green, fertile Sahara. This single genetic thread reshaped everything we thought about Nigeria's north. It showed that today's cultural boundaries, Hausa, Fulani, Kanuri, are not isolated roots, but braided tapestries woven by empire, migration, and survival. And the Kanem-Bornu legacy doesn't just exist in history books. It pulses through the people, carried forward by the very molecules that make them who they are. But the moment scientists followed these threads westward, into diaspora DNA, they stumbled on something far more confusing. What happens when genetic legacies contradict written history? And when African American ancestry doesn't match the slave ship manifests? If the ships didn't sail from Nigeria, why does African American DNA say otherwise? That question didn't just haunt families, it haunted entire archives. For years, historical records insisted on a pattern. The most enslaved Africans in North America came from Senegambia, the Gold Coast, Angola, places with known trade routes and ports controlled by European empires. But then came the DNA. In test after test, across platforms like 23andMe, Ancestry DNA, and African Ancestry, something strange kept showing up. An overwhelming presence of Nigerian ancestry. Not just vaguely West African, but specifically Yoruba, Igbo, Hausa. Populations whose coastal contact with transatlantic ships, according to 18th and 19th century shipping ledgers, should have been minimal. Something didn't add up. Historians scrambled to explain it, and the answer, as always, was darker than expected. After being taken to the Caribbean, many Nigerians, especially those enslaved in Barbados, Jamaica and Trinidad, were sold again. Shipped north into the American South in secondary migrations, often undocumented, silent. Human cargo shuffled between colonies like coins passed through hands. entire ethnic identities erased in the paperwork. But that wasn't the only reason. In the early 2000s, the HapMap project used Yoruba from Ibadan, Nigeria as its default African genome reference. It became the template, the anchor point. Which means for years, every African American DNA match leaned toward Nigeria. Whether the actual ancestry fit or not, it skewed perception, it blurred reality. That started to change in 2023, when a team at University College London sequenced over 1,300 genomes across 150 African ethnic groups. It became the largest African genomic reference to date. And for the first time, it allowed African Americans to trace their roots with more clarity, more accuracy, and more emotion than ever before. This wasn't just science, this was a reclamation. But while the diaspora searches for roots abroad, in Nigeria, new roots are being dug up by science. What if one country held more undiscovered genetic variants than any other place on Earth? And when they cracked the surface, what they found was nothing short of genomic treasure. In 2023, Nigerian scientists and global collaborators launched a landmark study, the Nigeria 100 K-Genome Project. Its goal, to sequence 100,000 individuals, covering more than 300 distinct ethnic groups. It's the most ambitious human genetic mapping ever, undertaken in Africa. And already the data is rewriting medicine. Why Nigeria? Because African genomes, especially Nigerian, contain up to 25% more genetic variation than any other population on Earth. Within those strands lie millions of rare variants, many of which have never been recorded in any medical textbook, never studied in any Western lab. The Yoruba and Asan were already studied in the 1000 Genomes Project. But this time, researchers are going deeper, adding groups like the Fulani, Kanuri, Igala, Gwari, and Bura. It's no longer just about ancestry, it's about survival. Already, these genomes have revealed ultra-rare loss-of-function mutations, the kind that disable faulty genes. Some of them may hold the key to curing kidney disease, cardiomyopathies, or even resistance to infections like HIV and malaria. One gene variant found in northern Nigerian communities was linked to a protective effect against high blood pressure, a condition that kills millions worldwide. In another case, a unique mutation in an Igbo genome hinted at natural resilience to chronic kidney disease. These aren't just statistics, they are people, grandmothers, children, elders, carrying the biological instructions to reshape human health forever. But then came the silence, not from labs, from the people. Because not everyone welcomed the scientists, not everyone trusted the labs. Something deeper was starting to stir, not a question of genetics, but of ownership. But amid the promise of medical breakthroughs, a social storm was quietly brewing. One rooted not in health, but in trust. What happens when a DNA test doesn't just unlock history, but shatters a family? And the spark that ignited it wasn't a new disease. It was a swab, a home test, a cotton tip dipped in saliva, and the unspoken fear behind it. In January 2025, Nigeria's leading genomics firm, Smart DNA, released a national analysis so explosive it hit the airwaves like a scandal. Among men who voluntarily requested paternity testing, 25.4% discovered they were not the biological fathers of the children they were raising. But buried deeper in the data was something more haunting. When the samples were filtered by birth order, the numbers jumped. For firstborn sons, often seen as the pillar of legacy in many Nigerian households, the false paternity rate surged to a staggering 63.9%. These weren't court-enforced tests. These weren't custody battles. According to Smart DNA, 83.7% of the requests were made for peace of mind. Silent fears, unspoken doubts, quiet betrayals. Most came from middle-aged Nigerian men facing retirement, inheritance decisions, or preparing for relocation as part of the Japa movement, Nigeria's brain drain exodus that's redrawing the map of African migration. For many, DNA wasn't just science. It became a confession, confirmation, sometimes even revenge. And the fallout was seismic. Social media exploded with leaked screenshots and anonymous confessions. Marriages imploded. Friendships vanished. Entire family trees were questioned. In communities where fatherhood was sacred, the lab became judge and jury. But beyond the drama, behind closed doors, something else began to take shape. Geneticists reviewing the same test data noticed unusual clusters, mutations, recurring markers linked to cardiovascular disease, Alzheimer's predisposition, even rare hereditary cancers. Unrelated families sharing biological footprints they never knew existed. The DNA that fractured homes was also quietly revealing how they might survive. And in this emotional wreckage of bloodlines tested, love undone, and trust burned, scientists realized what they were truly uncovering wasn't scandal. It was an inheritance, and not just of names. Because this modern crisis of identity doesn't end with broken families. It points toward a genetic time bomb, one planted thousands of years ago. What if your blood held the key to a disease that's haunted your family for generations? And now, that time bomb has a name: sickle cell disease. It's one of the most devastating genetic conditions in Nigeria, where over 150,000 babies are born each year with sickle cell anemia, according to the World Health Organization. For decades, this disease meant pain, stigma, and a shortened life. But then came the twist. Sickle cell wasn't just a curse, it was a shield. Geneticists had long suspected this paradox. Individuals who carry one copy of the sickle cell gene, what scientists call sickle cell trait, are far more resistant to malaria, the deadliest infectious disease in West Africa. It's a trade-off buried deep in survival. But in the past decade, Nigerian researchers began tracking something even stranger. A small number of long-term sickle cell survivors, people who lived well into their 50s and 60s, showed unusual genetic markers. Adaptive mutations linked to blood pressure regulation, vascular repair, and insulin metabolism. These weren't random miracles. They were inherited patterns, honed over millennia of battling heat, pathogens, and famine. In 2022, a groundbreaking study by researchers at University of Ibadan identified specific variants in the APOL1 gene, heavily present in Yoruba and Igbo populations, that offered insight not just into kidney disease, but how the body balances immunity and inflammation. And it's not just sickle cell. Nigeria's genome has become a pharmacogenomic goldmine, carrying rare variants that affect how individuals respond to common drugs like warfarin, statins, codeine, and even HIV antivirals. This isn't just about treating Africans, it's about rewriting how medicine works globally. Because inside these centuries-old bloodlines lies something the pharmaceutical world is only beginning to grasp: biological resilience, inherited suffering turned into strategy. But the most powerful lesson may be that Nigeria's DNA doesn't just tell us where we came from, it might reveal where humanity is headed. If science was built on the wrong reference, what happens when we finally correct it? Because for over a century, humanity's genetic blueprint has been incomplete. Genome studies, global health databases, pharmaceutical trials. Nearly all of them were built on European samples, with African genomes representing just 1 to 3% of the data pool. The science of the body was modelled on a fraction of the human family. And yet, Africa holds the deepest genetic memory of us all. This isn't a metaphor, it's math. The oldest diverging lineages of Homo sapiens are found in African populations. Groups like the Yoruba, Esan, Fulani, and Tiv don't just contain genetic variety, they span time, carrying mutations, adaptions, and ancestral alleles untouched by bottlenecks or Ice Age collapses. That's why the work of H3 Africa, launched in 2010, and the Nigeria 100K Genome Project, launched in 2023, is seismic. These aren't just African research efforts. They're the correction of a global blind spot. Already, this new data is transforming medical predictions. In 2024, rare variants found in Nigerian samples altered the global understanding of stroke risk in women. Another study, using Fulani DNA, unlocked a new model for kidney disease progression. Nigerian geneticists are helping rewrite NOM-AD, the world's most trusted database of human variation. And the irony is painful. The same continent that was once enslaved, colonized, and written out of the textbooks now holds the map to personalized medicine for every human being. Because the more we sequence Africa, the clearer the story of us becomes, not just black, not just African, but foundational. But if Africa is the origin, what else is still buried beneath its soil, or its silence? How do you recover a past when the land refuses to preserve it? The silence is not metaphorical. In West Africa, time doesn't fossilize gently, it dissolves. The humidity, the heat, the microbial life, they devour bone, erase DNA, and leave behind only fragments of stone and memory. It's a brutal truth archaeologists face across Nigeria, Ghana, Cameroon, and beyond. But in 2020, something unexpected broke through that silence. A team led by David Reich and Mark Lipson, in collaboration with Cameroonian researchers, recovered 4 ancient genomes from Shumlaka, a rock shelter in northwest Cameroon. The remains dated back between 8,000 and 3,000 years ago. And what they found didn't match the story we thought we knew. These individuals were not ancestors of the modern Bantu-speaking populations who now dominate West and Central Africa, including southern Nigeria. Genetically, they were closer to hunter-gatherer populations, long thought to have vanished. That one study shattered a myth that Nigeria's ethnic makeup had flowed in one straight line. Instead, it revealed a deeper pattern: waves of migration, population replacement, cultural convergence, layered over centuries. But here's the catch. That's still the only major ancient DNA study from the region. Nigeria, home to over 250 ethnic groups, the former heartland of empires like Nok, Oyo, Kanem-Bornu and Benin, remains genetically unexcavated. Its ancestors whisper, but no one has sequenced their bones. So scientists have turned to living people. Using modern Nigerian genomes, they're trying to reverse engineer the past, hunting for linguistic residues, cultural carryovers, mutation hotspots. It's like rebuilding a shattered sculpture from scattered dust. Because the ground may be silent, but the blood still speaks. Until then, the past speaks through living Nigerians, and every sequence brings us closer to who we are. What if your DNA carried a library of migrations, betrayals, survival, and love? Because in the end, this story isn't just about chromosomes or datasets. It's about people, fractured and fused by time, empire, and silence. Every Nigerian genome is a living scroll. you can read the paths of migrating mothers, crossing rivers and deserts long before borders were drawn. You can feel the scars of colonial disruption, where bloodlines were renamed, reclassified, and exported as commodities. And within that same DNA are blueprints for medical miracles that haven't even been discovered yet. In 2025, a child born in Lagos was diagnosed with a rare form of leukemia. But her recovery didn't come from the latest American therapy. It came from a clinical trial based on a mutation found only in Eastern Nigerian blood samples, the same samples once buried in forgotten corners of research labs. That's what legacy means. Not just ancestry, but agency. A paternity test in Abuja tears a family apart. A genetic study in Ibadan rewrites human history. And half a world away, a scientist in Boston holds a vial of synthesized DNA, unaware that its sequence came from the bones of a slave or the blood of a king. Nigeria's genome has been mislabeled, misread, and misused, but it's never been erased. Today it's becoming one of the most important biological archives in the world. A mirror, a roadmap, a resurrection, and maybe a reckoning. Because once you know the code, you can never know it. But if Nigeria's genome reshaped everything, what might Ghana's, Ethiopia's, or Congo's tell us next? The story of humanity began in Africa, but its ending may depend on how well we listen to its genes. Because this wasn't the end of the story. It was the prologue. Across the continent, the next chapters are already unfolding. In Ghana, researchers are uncovering mitochondrial haplogroups that trace maternal lineages older than written language, women whose genetic signatures predate even the Sahara's transformation into desert. Each cell carries a whisper from queens, traders, farmers, passed from mother to child in an unbroken chain. In Ethiopia, the highlands hold a different secret, ancient genetic signals hinting at Denisovan ancestry, previously thought exclusive to Asia. A silent echo from an extinct cousin, embedded in a people who have lived at altitude for millennia, shaped by both environment and evolution. And in the dense rainforests of the Congo Basin, scientists are untangling the legacy of post-Bantu migrations. Using new genomic clustering models, they're identifying ancient groups that don't fit into current tribal or linguistic categories. Lineages forgotten by history but preserved by the body. This is not anthropology, it's a revolution. Nigeria was the first mirror, but it's only one reflection. The map of African ancestry is no longer a line, it's a living spiral, folding inward, looping back, revealing deeper roots with every rotation. We're not tracing history, we're touching it. And if you're drawn to the secrets that live inside blood, bone and breath, if your identity feels like a question waiting for its answer, you've only just stepped into the first room of the archive. Because sometimes the most ancient truths aren't buried underground, they're hidden in us.